As well.
Hi everyone, welcome to our Facebook Live. My name is Peter Brukner. I'm the founder of Defeat Diabetes. I'm a sports medicine physician, sport and exercise medicine physician by trade, but have a passion about diet, nutrition, and carbohydrate restricted diets and so on. So I'm your host tonight. And our special guest is Daniel Velardo, and I might get Daniel to tell us a little bit about himself and why he's here. Good evening, Daniel.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, so just a little bit about myself. I'm a school teacher and run health and nutrition coach as well. I'll be joining tonight just to discuss carbohydrates with exercise and what people can do about it at the moment, and the reason why we don't need so many carbohydrates, which is what's been prescribed for many years now.
Right. Thanks, Daniel. We'll get back to you in a minute because Daniel's got an interesting story to tell us. So I thought I'd just, start off a little history lesson, I guess, about what athletes have been doing in the past, or people who are exercising. And basically the fuel for athletes has been, for a long, long time, has been carbohydrates. So we've been, a carb obsessed athletic community. So we have our pasta parties the night before the marathon. We eat our gels and our Powerade and Gatorade at halftime in football matches and so on. So the theory being that carbs are the best source of energy for the athlete, and that we need to keep our carbohydrate stores, which carbohydrate is stored in the form of glycogen, particularly in your muscle. So we need to keep our glycogen stores as full as we can. And then when they get run down, you have to replenish your glycogen stores. So that's what athletes for years and years have been using. And there are certain problems with using carbohydrate as your store. For a start, the first problem is that you run out of carbohydrates pretty quickly. You can only store a small amount of carbohydrates in your glycogen. So if, for instance, you're running a marathon or even a longer event, you're going to run out of that glycogen, that carbohydrate stores, and you're going to, what they say is hit the wall. And I'm sure some of you may have done that when you're running a marathon. It's not a very pleasant experience when you run out of energy. So to counteract that, you have to keep replenishing your supply, as I said. So during a race or during a competition, you have to keep eating or drinking carbohydrates in the form of a carbohydrate drink, or some easily digestible carbohydrates in the form of gels or bananas, or you see lots of people eating that sort of stuff during an endurance event. So that's the way it's been, and that's still the way largely that many elite athletes would fuel themselves with carbohydrate. Now, there's obviously another potential fuel for your body to use, and that's fat in the form of ketones. So your body is really a dual system. It can run off carbohydrates, or it can run off fat. Now, if the carbohydrates are there, it will always run preferentially run off carbohydrates. So the only way to get it to run off fat is to remove the carbohydrate, so that your only fuel available is fat. And then you can exercise using fat as a fuel. So if you remove the carbohydrate, you're then left with fat. Now, there are pros and cons of using fat as a fuel. So the big advantage, is that you don't have to keep replenishing it. We have enough fat stored. Everyone, even the skinniest person, has enough fat stored to run miles and miles and miles and miles. So you're never going to run out of fat stores. So you, in theory, don't even have to eat or replenish your fuel supply during a marathon or an ultra marathon or an Ironman or anything like that. So that's a huge advantage, because refueling while you're competing is fraught with danger. It's fraught with stomach upsets, and the number of people who've had to race off the marathon course for toilet breaks, or had a lot of digestive issues during races and so on. So you don't have those issues with fat. The other advantage, is that you don't have the disadvantage of eating lots of carbs. So, when you're fueling yourself only on carbs, you're having massive amounts of carbohydrates. And, most of you in this group would know that we don't think that's a very good thing for your health. And I believe we have a whole generation of athletes who've had massive amounts of carbohydrates, who almost invariably, or many of them, will be insulin resistant by now and heading down a bad path as far as their metabolic health goes. So there's the general sort of health issue of excessive carbohydrates, as well as the athletic performance issues, if you like. One of the other advantages of using fats as your fuel is in recovery. So we know that carbohydrates and sugars in particular are very inflammatory, and you tend to when you exercise, you often finish up with inflamed joints and muscles. And when you use fat instead of sugar as a fuel, your soreness, your inflammation is much less. So you have less pain, and you seem to recover better from activity. So I've certainly know plenty of people who, for instance, have done their first Ironman and expect that they're going to be laid up for weeks not being able to move, who wake up the next morning and feel fine and can go for a run. So there's that advantage of fats over carbohydrates. So you'll see there are certain advantages. So why then are people using, or elite athletes or serious athletes, using carbs so much? Well, there's a theory, or there's a thought, and then there's a fair bit of evidence for it too, that for high intensity exercise, and we'll get back to what that means in a minute, you need carbohydrates because they produce more energy than at a higher rate than fats do. So what sometimes my patients will tell me is that, yeah, I'm fine on fats, using fats, until I have to ride up a hill or have to sprint when I'm running or cycling. Then I don't feel as though I have that extra bit of that next gear to go into. So there are certainly some people who need some carbohydrates for that extra energy. So what's developed now is a theory, I guess, of a mixture of carbohydrates and fats, and everyone's different. There are some people out there who are playing AFL football at the top level who are completely low carb, or even carnivore, or certainly low carb, and they don't need any sort of top ups. There are others who are low carb most of the time, during the week, for instance, and then find they need to top up on carbs on race day or on match day or whatever. It's all very individual. And a lot of people have just been playing around with what is right for them. And what's become very popular is this theory of train low, compete high. So that during the week, for instance, while you're training, you'll have quite a low intake of carbohydrate. You'll restrict your carbohydrate intake, so you're working largely off fats. And then on match day or the night before match day, you might top up with a few carbs just to give you that extra bit of energy. So it's all very, very variable. Different people find different things suit them, and there's a whole range you'll find in an Olympic event or an AFL game. There's a whole range of different diets that people are using. So that's the theory. Now, our friend Daniel is actually a pretty serious runner, a very serious runner, but a very good runner at a sort of a sub-elite level. And he'll tell you his best marathon time, which is, Daniel?
2:40, so 2 hours and 40 minutes.
2 hours 40. Now, I always consider anyone who runs under 3 hours in a marathon is a serious runner. They're very good. It's not an easy thing to do. Now, they might be trying to break 2 hours at the other end, but they're freaks, those guys. But for the average non-professional athlete, a sub 3 hour marathon is an outstanding performance. And Daniel's running 2 hours 40. So, Daniel, you used to be like everyone else, have lots of carbs when you were running. Tell us your story about your running and your nutrition.
Yeah, so as you said, with carbohydrates previously, I'd eat the typical diet of rice, pasta, load up on it a fair bit. What you said before about recovery is very true. So inflammation. So I was finding I was quite sore, after many sessions. since switching to low carb, and I do follow mainly the train low, compete high sort of method. I found it has worked well for me. But since going to low carb, the inflammation's not there. I can't believe just the soreness has disappeared from session to session. So that's probably one of the major things that's been a massive tick for me. You mentioned high intensity workout. So when I first switched over from a high carb to low carb lifestyle, I found that the difference was pretty difficult at the start. It took me about 3 weeks to adapt to a low carb. And as you said before, with people, going for a sprint, again, when I was doing those speed sessions, I really struggled at the start, but that was only the first 2 to 3 weeks. Then after that, it's just like the body adapted and there's been no issue at all. So, a perfect example will be yesterday morning where I did a session, which is a speed session, which was 5 minutes. So 5 by 5 minutes at 3:15 pace. And I did that fasted. So I didn't have any fuel beforehand, just ate dinner the night before, which was, just some homemade burgers with some green leafy veggies. And I was fine the next morning, just a bit of water before I started. And that's it pretty much. So I found as, you get used to your own body and you get used to the different sessions that you're doing and how to adjust the amount of carbohydrates that you need for that. But yeah, mainly, as I said, mainly low carb throughout the whole week. And then if it's a major race, if it's like a 3K or a 5K race where the intensity is pretty high for duration of the event, I will top up a bit with real food. So using potatoes or bananas beforehand, but nothing like I used to in terms of, massive bowls of rice and pastas beforehand.
And what about during the race? Let's say a marathon. Take us through like the 24 hours before the marathon, and then what you would have during and after the marathon.
Yep. So I still use gels during a marathon race, which is interesting because during training I don't take anything, and there's been no issue at all. But I think it's more of when I'm running at that intensity during the marathon. Like, to give you an example, a 240 marathon's around 3:45 per kilometer pace. I'll take maybe 3 gels during a marathon, and I also take a electrolyte tablet, which is a no sugar one. So it's just a cis hydro tablets. So that's just a bit of electrolytes in there. So some sodium, potassium, and some magnesium is in those tablets, and I just take that throughout the marathon. Right,
and then the night before or the morning of the marathon, what would you have anything different?
So as I said, I compete high, so I will have carbohydrates only for the race day. That would be a couple of bananas beforehand. But yeah, other than that, like, it's just a stock standard low carb diet. So as I said, meat, veg, some nuts, seeds, eggs, full fat Greek yogurt. That's all fine. But just, on the day of the marathon, I do top up a little bit just to have those stores in there.
Sure. And what about after the event? Because, when you're having carbohydrates, people always say, well, you've got to replenish your glycogen supplies and so on. Do you feel you need to do anything, eat after the event or even the next day? How do you feel?
No, there's days I'll come back and, like, for example, I'm doing a long run. I may not be hungry for 2 hours after it or 3 hours after it, but generally I try and get some protein in and a good source of fat with that. So that might even just be some, Greek yogurt goes down well for me after a run. There's some berries and nuts and seeds with that, or I'll have some kind of meat with it, with some veggies, and that's it. Like this, I don't top up on glycogen at all after a run. And I've found there's been no reason for it, and my recovery's been fantastic.
Great. Okay, so you're both a running coach and a health coach. So I come to you and I say I want to train up to, I'm a runner. I run 5 and 10 Ks. I want to train up to do a marathon, but I only eat carbohydrates. I've never tried the low carb thing. So take me through how you would take an athlete on that journey through their training and their nutrition to get them up to running a marathon.
Yep. So the first thing is find out what race they want to do. And if the major race is within a couple of weeks, then I wouldn't advise any changes until after that race. If you've got a few months up your sleeve, perfect, good time to go ahead, because research is telling us it takes anywhere between 2 weeks to 2 months to adapt to a low carb lifestyle in terms of athletic performance. So just need to be wary that it can take a different amount of time for each individual. You want to understand and explain the intensities of running. So in terms of, running, your program should be structured roughly around 80% of it is at low intensity, and you're between 15 and 20% is at a higher intensity. So you want to correctly structure the program so they can build up to those kilometers and increase the distance as they go. In terms of nutrition, it's just about you got to believe in the process to start with. I think a lot of it is a mental battle to try and get out of that whole idea of we've been taught in one way for so long to have carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is king. So we need to get that thought out of our head and be able to be comfortable not believing that. And it does take a bit of time. It took me a few weeks. I remember speaking to yourself, Peter, beforehand. I said the time I was trying to run, and you go, I'll never forget it. You just said to me, you'll be fine. No issue at all. So that gave me full confidence that I would be able to do it. And you were right, which is great. It's just really important that take your time. You allow yourself a few months to adapt, because it can take, as I said, can take in between 2 weeks to 2 months to do that. You're structuring your program correctly. So we're not increasing things rapidly. We're slowly adjusting our diet as we go. I know you mentioned before about running on fat, but there's also benefits to also running fasted as well. So that can be, better fat oxidation happens, and we can spare our muscle glycogen for those higher intensity sessions as well. So there are plenty of benefits to it, and you'll be amazed at how quickly you will adapt once you get that right mindset and the structure within the program correctly.
And what are some of the things that you might be feeling during that adaptation process? When you say it takes two weeks, 3 weeks, I found an average is probably 2 or 3 weeks, usually not much longer than that. But what are some of the sort of symptoms, or how you're going to feel? Because the important thing, I think we'd agree, is that you understand that's what's happening, and you don't give up and say, oh no, I tried it for a week, it wasn't right for me, I felt terrible, and I gave up. So what sort of things do you feel?
Yep, so you will feel flat, especially during your speed sessions, or if you're trying to pick up the pace, you just be like, I've just got nothing to give here. And you just feel like you've already ran, 30 Ks plus. Just feels like you've absolutely got no speed at all. And it is tempting to throw the towel in very quickly, and you're like, oh, this is just not worth it. But once you get over that hump, it is unbelievable. And I've had a client just 2 months ago, who's tried to go low carb, and now she's running fasted, and it took her 15 days exactly to swap over. So the first couple of runs, she was trying to do 25 Ks on the Sunday. Previously, consuming gels within the run. So she went out for the first run, didn't have anything. She felt extremely flat, didn't want to continue. So she had to stop a few times, walk, run. Next week, similar things. And the week after that, she just ran the whole way, just sipping on water and no problem, back to her normal pace. So, that was a quick adaptation of 15 days. So it just goes to show that it does not take long at all.
Sure. So what of distances and what intensity do you think is appropriate for someone to go onto a low carb diet as far as their running goes? I mean, do you think if someone wants to run, middle distance, or is it really the longer distances that they benefit most from?
I personally believe they can benefit on all distances. So, you think about, let's just take a 1500 meters race for example. Again, a lot of the training, 80% of it will be done at low intensity, and 20% of it will be done at very high intensity. They can top up on those sessions. So don't get me wrong, 1500 meter runners at an elite level are running extremely quick, and I believe they will need carbohydrates to hit those paces and fuel effectively for the intensity they're running at. But during their training sessions and during their low intensity stuff, they can definitely be on a low carb. And then, they're not injecting as much sugar, so we're not having to worry about tooth decay. We're not worrying about all these other health issues that can happen. And as you said before, people becoming insulin resistant and sensitive, that can avoid that from happening. So definitely all distances will be suited. However, the amount that you might have to top up on your speed sessions and races is going to vary depending on the event.
I know with my own experience and I'm not no great runner. I just run a little bit on the treadmill in the gym and do a bit of other stuff. But I certainly noticed I didn't have too much problems in the first couple of weeks the way some people do, but it didn't seem to really affect me badly. But after about 4 or 5 weeks, I remember running on the treadmill and thinking that I could just run forever. It just was a different feeling to anything I'd ever had before. I just had this sensation that nothing was gonna, I could keep going forever. And I don't know whether that's something that you or your clients have come across, but it was a dramatic change for me.
Yeah, definitely. Like just a couple of weeks before the lockdown, we were allowed to run for more than 2 hours. I'm in the middle of a Melbourne marathon prep at the moment, and I hit 35k. And same thing. I didn't even drink water at all. Like just ran, got up out of bed, ran the 35, came back, didn't eat for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. Was with the kids, and then had lunch with them. So definitely that is a massive reported benefit as well, and a lot of people do report that. Especially at the lower intensity. There's no issue with that. You can just keep going.
One of the other things that I noticed was that I'd had a chronic Achilles tendon problem for years. One of my friends had actually scanned it and said, "Oh, it looks horrible. I can't believe you haven't ruptured it." And it didn't look too great. And so I'd wake up every morning and, your first step on the ground would be sore. You'd need a little while to get moving. You couldn't pinch the Achilles tendon. It was really, sort of touch when I pinched it. And then again, about a few weeks into my low carb experience, I suddenly realised that I wasn't feeling my Achilles anymore, and hadn't had any pain, and I could squeeze my Achilles without any problem, and I've not had an issue with it since. And to me, that was really quite dramatic in that we spend a lot of time as sports physicians and physios and so on, trying to reduce inflammation, with drugs and different things, different therapies and so on. And here I was, no drugs. I just used diet to reduce inflammation, which really blew me away.
Yeah, definitely. As I was saying before, like my soreness has gone down since I've been low carb. Like, now I can come off a long run and train the next day, no issue. I can, after a speed session, the inflammation is not there, and I can bounce back and recover pretty quickly for the next session. So, you're able to train at your optimum level for longer. You don't have to reduce the intensity the days after, so you're definitely getting the fitness benefits as well.
Yeah, we did a little bit of research last year during lockdown, so it was a bit restricted, but into the link between diet and knee pain, osteoarthritis in particular of the knee, the most common cause of knee pain in middle-aged and older people, and we found quite a significant reduction in knee pain with an anti-inflammatory type diet, like a carbohydrate restricted diet, restricting carbs, restricting vegetable oils, and the things that we know that are inflammatory. And we're about to embark on a bigger trial with that, but quite significant results. So they lost weight, but more importantly, they reduced their knee pain. I should tell a little story about one of the Australian cricketers that I was looking after, and this particular cricketer had a lot of knee pain, and to the point where they had to stop playing cricket and threatened his career basically. And he'd been to see everyone. He had scans and MRI scans and arthroscopies, and no one could work out what was wrong with his knee. And eventually he saw a rheumatologist who decided that he had a form of arthritis called a seronegative arthritis, which is a bit similar to rheumatoid arthritis, but very inflammatory arthritis. And put him on some pretty powerful drugs, and then put him on some even more powerful drugs. And so when I met him, he was injecting himself with a very powerful autoimmune type drug, very expensive. It was costing $15,000 a year to have these fortnightly injections to keep his knee pain under control. And his knee pain was okay, but he said about 10 days after the injection, his knee would start to ache, and then he would know it was time for his next injection, and he would inject himself again. And he was back playing cricket. He wasn't able to train fully. He was back in the Australian Test squad, but hadn't made it back into the team at that stage. Anyway, we were on tour in India, and he was actually also a little bit overweight, which is interesting because it's amazing how many serious athletes are a little bit overweight, and that's largely because they're filling themselves up with carbohydrate, and it's incredible. They're training nearly all day, every day, and yet they're still 2, 3, 4 kilograms overweight. Incredibly common. Anyway, he was a bit overweight, wanted to drop some weight, and it was just after I'd lost a whole lot of weight, and he'd observed that, and he said, "Look, I'd like to try what you did." And I said, "Sure." And so he went on a low carb diet, which is not the easiest thing to do in India. No rice, no naan, all those sort of nice things that you can have in India. But he was very strict. The good thing about elite athletes is they've got pretty good self-discipline, and he went very strictly low carb. Anyway, 3 weeks later, he came up to me and said, "Doc, I forgot to have my injection last week." I said, what do you mean? He said, "Well, I haven't had any knee pain, and I didn't sort of get that reminder, and I just realised it's 3 weeks since my injection. What do you think I should do? Do you think I should take the injection?" Well, of course, I pretended that was exactly what I'd expected, and I knew that would happen. Not, but I said, no, why don't you wait and see? Anyway, to cut a long story short, he didn't need to have his injections, so he saved the Australian taxpayer $15,000, and he was able to increase his training, got back in the Test team. 12 months later, he was in the top 10 batsmen in the world, and he's had no problems with his knee since. And so that was an inflammatory arthritis that he had. So that really blew my. This was some time ago when I was just embarking on this whole journey, and really blew me away. I just couldn't believe that the diet, could have such an effect. We're taught as doctors, inflammation. Well, we use drugs, and we use these anti-inflammatory drugs, which all have horrible side effects and so on. And there was never any suggestion that diet would be a factor in inflammation. And the more I've looked into it, and the more patients I've seen, the more colleagues I've given advice to, they can dramatically reduce their pain, and which is due to inflammation, by taking the inflammatory foods out of their diet. And we know that the inflammatory foods are particularly processed carbohydrates, sugars, and processed foods, and anything that's cooked in vegetable oil. So most processed foods contain sugar, vegetable oils, and grains, all of which are probably pretty inflammatory. So if you remove those processed foods and get onto an anti-inflammatory diet, and so there are things that actually improve inflammation, things like omega-3 fats and things like fish and fish oil and so on can improve your inflammation. It can make a dramatic difference, and we don't need those nasty drugs to treat inflammation. So that was a real eye opener for me, and it sort of changed my whole sort of outlook on the management of inflammation, and it's made a big difference.
Just a good point you mentioned there about elite athletes being overweight. I think that's probably one of the major things that I've found since switching to low carb is just how much easier it is to stay at my racing weight. Beforehand, even though I was doing 100 Ks plus a week, I was always constantly hungry. Whereas now it's the opposite. Since I've increased the protein and the good fats, I'm a lot more satisfied and, not snacking as much, and, just able to remain at that weight for a lot longer.
Yeah, the effect on hunger is it's really the first thing you notice, isn't it? I remember when I sort of turned to low carb, I went from eating probably 3 meals and 3 snacks a day because I was just constantly hungry. Because you'd have your cereal for breakfast, and then 2 hours later you'd be starving again, so you'd have to have a muffin, and then 2 hours later it was lunch, you'd have a sandwich, and there was this constant cycling of eating carbohydrates, and then 2 or 3 hours later being hungry again, and that's really the pattern. So carbohydrates basically make you hungry, whereas fats and proteins fill you up and take that hunger away. So that's really valuable. I think, and that's obviously enormously helpful for weight loss. If you're not hungry the whole time and not eating the whole time and snacking, then So how, just finally, we're running out of time, but COVID has obviously had a massive impact on our lives, and I think it's been a real challenge as far as diet goes. And because I think people are largely working at home. They have to walk past the fridge numerous times a day, and they get bored, and it's too easy just to snack and so on. I mean, what's your experience of the people you work with and your colleagues, and what advice would you give to sort of prevent those COVID kilos that they talk about coming on?
Yep, it's an excellent question, and I like how you said there, walking past the fridge and people are bored, because that is a real thing, and people are struggling with habits of, as you said, there's a lot more time at home. People, lack that self-control at times to not walk past the fridge and open something or go in the pantry and get a snack. So I think it's just important to listen to your cues, and just ask yourself, are you actually hungry, or is it boredom? And a good way to do it is, if you think you're not hungry or you might be, just maybe have a sip of water or a tea, wait 20 minutes, 30 minutes, because generally the brain takes around 20 minutes to tell us that we're full. So definitely have a pause, get that fluid in, and that generally will be enough for you to hold off on. But yeah, it is about breaking that habit and not being bored. If you've got kids at home that might be bugging you or pushing your buttons, and it's easy to go to the fridge and give them something to eat. But yeah, again, just ask yourself, are we actually hungry or not? And it's great. I think it's one positive coming out of COVID is people are cooking a lot more. However, we're seeing a lot more sugary things being made. So it's a fantastic time. Jump on the Defeat Diabetes app, have a look at the recipes, make some of those healthy, treats if you like, once or twice a week. Try those different meals on there, get the kids involved with yourself as well, which is a great way to get them involved and keep them entertained. And, hopefully we can change the mindset of people and make it become our culture, where we're not just snacking for the sake of it, but we're actually listening to our body cues.
Right. Okay. Well, that's fantastic. Now we've got a whole bunch of questions and comments from our audience. So let's tackle some of those and see how we go. One question is that I'm a weekend warrior cyclist. I find I'm fine on low carb. In fact, I find it hard to digest food when I work hard. And I ride fasted, and then after I eat when I feel I can stomach it. Because that is an issue, isn't it? As we talked about before, the same, Charlotte says, I used to use gels, my long distance Rise Plus electrolytes. And these days I just focus on hydration, don't have to worry about the gels, which really is similar to your experience, isn't it?
Yeah, correct. So as you said there, digesting food when we're working hard that is correct, because we're, the blood is drawn away from our stomach, it's going towards the working muscles. So that is definitely correct. Just with the question, Peter, can you just repeat it in terms of low carbs? So they're finding it fine beforehand, but just when they're exercising, is that correct?
No. I think it's basically just reconfirming what you said, that Charlotte says she feels so awesome riding fasted and has none of the stomach issues that they used to have. So, again, that so many people have stomach issues with lots of carbs and running, as you said, because of the blood supplies are all being used to power those muscles. We've got a question saying from I'm not a runner. How does this apply to other sports like dancing and yoga? And really, I'll have a stab at answering that. I mean, it really doesn't make any difference. I think most people can work to play their sport or do their activity at pretty high intensity levels on either fasted or on a low carb and healthy fat diet. So there's really it's really just as appropriate for those activities, whether it be dancing, yoga, whether it be gardening, housework, whatever. I mean, whatever activity that you're doing, you're going to be fine on a low carb diet. It's really the only people who need carbs when they're exercising are those who they're pretty high intensity, and they will have varying amounts of carbs. But I think, for nearly all of us out there, we can manage perfectly well on minimum carbs and using fat as our fuel.
And just there with Peter, just mentioned with the high intensity, we're probably talking around 85 to 90% of your max heart rate and above, or a 9 out of 10 on your rate of perceived exertion on a scale.
And certainly something that I haven't got to for many, many years. Okay. Penny's got a question. Are there certain things that are better to eat before exercise and then after? What's your experience with eating before and after exercise, Daniel?
Yep. So again, depending on what the type of exercise is, if it's I go by time. So I just like to make sure the stomach is cleared beforehand. So if you're going to do a session, let's say in the afternoon, personally, I don't like to eat at least 2 hours beforehand. I just like to make sure that's digested and everything is cleared, so I'm feeling nice and fresh. If it's a morning session and it's a hard session, I will eat, say, 1 banana before, maybe 30 minutes beforehand, something that's easily to be digested. Otherwise, I'll just do the session fasted if it's a lower intensity session. After it, I think it's important to get some protein in with some good source of fat. So that might be, dairy is a fantastic product if you're able to tolerate it. So full fat Greek yogurt with some nuts and seeds, maybe some berries in there as well. Avocado is excellent with some smoked salmon or eggs. Boiled eggs, for example, is such an easy thing to carry with you. It doesn't require refrigeration, for long periods of time. So, these type of foods that you can take with you, easy to bring in great in the nutrition, fantastic foods to consume. So you're definitely after, aim for some protein around 20 grams if you can aim for that.
Great. Okay. Another question. I haven't exercised in a while, but starting to get back into it with home body weight workouts. Should I exercise in the morning or later in the day, fasted, or something in my stomach? Are you a morning exerciser or an evening exerciser, Daniel?
Personally, for me, it has to be in the morning, otherwise it doesn't happen. So depends on life is the question for that one. So I've got 2 kids and I can get out in the morning while they're asleep, which is when I train. Afternoon just wouldn't happen for me. But that's just my personal life at the moment. Everyone will be different. So I don't think it really makes a difference. In the morning, it's good that we're rested, we're coming off sleep. So in terms of our body, where muscles and stuff are ready to go, so that's excellent. In the afternoon, we might find that you're a bit more tired towards the end of the day, depending on your job. However, any time that you can get out is going to be a benefit. So whatever you can fit into your time is definitely a bonus there. And I agree. Just the other part of that question. Just the other part of that question. Should you be fasted? It was. Or something in the stomach, again, depending on the time of the day. Like if you're first thing in the morning, you'll be able to do it fasted, no issue at all. If it's 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you're probably going to have something throughout the day. But again, just make sure you give yourself at least an hour beforehand just to digest so you can, feel nice and free and no issues in the stomach.
Yeah, I think that's the issue. If you are running off fat as your fuel, then you can run fasted. There's no doubt about it. If you're having to use carbohydrates, then you probably need to have something beforehand. But that's one of the advantages of being on a low carb diet as an athlete, and that you don't have to eat beforehand or afterwards. You constantly have, or during. You're much better off. Okay, a couple more questions, and then we better finish up because we're over time already. What's recommended if you're playing sport for a couple of hours to bring sugar levels up to if you need to? Well, I think for a couple of hours, usually you don't need to top up your sugar levels. If you're playing whatever you're playing, game of football or running doing a 2-hour run or anything like that, if you're running off fat, so if you're low carb and you're used to using your fat as your fuel, then that's one of the great advantages, is that you don't have to top up your sugar levels. And amazingly, your blood glycogen levels stay pretty full, and so you've always got that extra if you need it. But if you need to have something, then as you say, have a banana or something like that during it. But by and large, you shouldn't have to use it if you're not reliant on carbohydrates. So one last question. As you probably know from the awesome researchers Volek and Finney, who are the gurus of low carb in athletics, Jeff Volek and Steve Finney, they found that some fat-adapted athletes can actually burn 90% fat for fuel at higher intensities with training. So maybe no need for carbs at 85% intensity. I've certainly found that I can do 1 hour cyclocross style events, threshold and supra, with just a creamy coffee. I guess the jury is still out whether we need at all. And then there's been another comment that someone else agrees with that they can ride for 2 hours plus in a fasted state. And I think, look, there is a lot of individual variability. As I said, it ranges from people who can do high intensity, play a game of AFL football completely fasted, low carb, without any problems. And then at the other end, there are some who can, by and large, do well with low carb, but find they need an extra little bit to top up. So I think there's no one rule for everyone. There are certainly people, as the person suggested, that can go at 90% burning at 90% fat for fuel, but there are others who can't. So I don't think you can strictly say yes, you need carbs. No, you don't. It's a matter of playing around with what's best for you. But by and large, the principle is that you don't need a lot of carbs, certainly. And you can, if you go low carb, you get your fat oxidation working, and then your body gets used to burning fat, which it can do very, very effectively. And if anyone tells you that you need glucose for your brain, anything like that, tell them that you've got more than enough glucose on board for your brain. Your brain's not going to stop working. My brain didn't stop working 9 years ago, but I think it's still working. Although some people might disagree. All right, one last question. I have a close friend who has ridden in a 240-kilometre cycling event fasted. He tested after the event and was completely okay. Blood sugars were on the low side of very low side of okay. He had a good meal afterwards of protein and fat, and everything was good. And I think that's absolutely spot on, isn't it? Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, if you told me 10 years ago, that someone could do a 240-kilometre cycling event fasted, I'd have laughed at you. But we've all learned a lot in the last 10 years or so. I have anyway, and I know you've been on that journey too, Daniel. I think those of us have been on the journey. It just is amazing. I think back to what life was like before low carb, and it's an amazing transformation in our lives, and it feels just so much healthier and better, and can exercise so much. I enjoy exercise so much more. It's interesting. People often say, "Oh, you've got to exercise to lose weight." Well, I actually think you've got to lose weight to exercise, because you feel so much more, energetic and so on when you've lost some weight and you've got rid of those carbs and so on. So anyway, we better finish up there. We're getting into trouble here. We've gone over time. Daniel, thank you very much for your time. It's just great to have someone who's been there and done that and is living the life and showing so well. Good luck in the Melbourne Marathon if they haven't. Exactly. It might be a virtual marathon on a treadmill, but
not looking great.
No, it's not looking great, is it? But anyway, I'm sure whenever you run your next marathon, and keep up the great work. And thank you for everyone for joining us, and for those of you that have sent questions in. And we'll let you know when the next Facebook Live is. And keep up the good work. Good night, everyone.